Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. With me today is my co-host, Cleveland area attorney and Republican strategist, Jay Carson. We begin the show with the tragic events in Charlottesville, Virginia, where white nationalists and other racist hate groups came together in a so-called Unite the Right rally centered around opposition to the planned removal of a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. There were numerous clashes between protesters and counter-protesters, with by far the most horrific being a young white man deliberately ramming his vehicle into counter-protesters, resulting in 1 death and 19 injuries. President Trump condemned the violence, but made no specific mention of white nationalists or other hate groups, instead pointedly saying that there was violence on many sides. Later on Saturday, the Justice Department announced that it would be starting a civil rights investigation into the circumstances of the deadly car ramming. So, Jay, what are your thoughts on this? Both, I guess, what happened and also how President Trump and his administration have responded.
Well, as far as first of all, what happened, obviously it's a tragedy. It is, to say that this kind of stuff goes on in our country in 2017 is really sort of ought to be a source of embarrassment for our nation, and especially I'm going to make a call out to any conservatives who listen to this and who listen to the show, and say, look, this is obviously not what mainline conservatism, Republican thought stands for. And there was a time when the conservative movement took some really pretty strong steps to get this element out and away from any sort of respectable public debate, and treat them as the pariahs that they ought to be. And I think the time has come for that again. And in terms of Trump's remarks, look, this is Trump being Trump. It's almost like he starts off the statement as he ought to. If we condemn this in the harshest terms, and this is terrible, and we won't accept bigotry, and then he throws in the by a lot of people, and just sort of makes it completely fuzzy. I think there's plenty of time to argue about, and I'm a big arguer about this, political correctness, Black Lives Matter, is that helpful to our larger debate? But when you have an instance of this where it is violence by a hate group perpetrated against others, I think you just have to call it what it is, and call out those groups by name. I don't think this is an instance where you can waffle and say, well, little both sides, come on, everybody's kind of at fault. I don't think that's acceptable here. And I'm hopeful that with the Justice Department investigation, Jeff Sessions will step up and really lower the hammer on and at this point there's one suspect, and it's not clear whether he acted in concert with anyone else. But look at the group as a whole. If its intent was not simply to demonstrate a point of view, which it's constitutionally protected, even though we may find that point of view abhorrent. But if their goal was to incite violence, incite a riot, which is typically the goal of these groups.
Yeah, I think really President Trump, who, you said Trump being Trump, but Trump being Trump is just letting loose and sort of calling people out by name sometimes. And here, all of a sudden, he becomes Trump the even-handed, Trump the waffler, and that just sits wrong with a lot of people, and not just on the left. I mean, Orrin Hatch, who's says we should call evil by its name. There were a number of Republicans who said, listen, you have to call this what it is. And especially coming from a man, Donald Trump, who mocked President Obama for his weakness in not calling Islamic terrorism, all of a sudden he can't call out white nationalists and neo-Nazis. I mean, my God, if there's ever one group that you should be able to call out.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. In some ways, And please, this isn't to diminish what happened, but when something like this does happen, as a president, speaking from a purely Machiavellian sort of viewpoint, political viewpoint, it's something of a gift, because this is how can you screw this up? Like you said, how can you not condemn neo-Nazis? I mean, it's sort of that's sort of the big fastball right down the middle of the plate, and he botched it, and that's again, there's just.
And yet it just seems odd that he would, given his personality, that he would botch that, which makes a lot of people say, well, what's going on here? We got the whole Steve Bannon alt-right sort of fuzzy, hazy connection some people have suggested. And is he just uncomfortable calling out people who are, whether he likes it or not, part of his base? I mean, I think it's at least a reasonable question to raise.
Yeah, although, I mean, I think you may be, you may be assuming he's giving this more thought than he's giving it.
Well, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but then again,
I mean, I don't think he said, okay, I'm going to say something. I guess I need to condemn this, but I don't want to be too harsh because I don't want to offend my base, or something like that. I think it was just him off the cuff, and again, not being thoughtful. Whereas if you took, I mean, just a minute and had someone else say, listen, Mr. President, this is a moment where he had the opportunity to sort of rise above what he has been, and he doesn't do it, and that's disappointing. So I don't see it as much as I know probably liberals will see that as there was some sort of dog whistle underneath there that is sort of a nod and a wink. I don't think that's the case. I think it's just him being off the cuff and not thinking what he's saying, and again, if there's anything that good that comes out of it, it is the ability that we can stand up to say this is not what America stands for. This is not what anyone on the right stands for or should tolerate.
Yeah. Before we move on, Jay, I have a few more things to say on this, but before we do, I want to thank our first sponsor today, Blue Bottle Coffee. I love coffee, and not just coffee in general. I can't drink that supermarket pre-ground, comes in that huge canister sort of stuff. It tastes like rancid brown water to me. I don't know if water can be rancid, but you get what I'm saying. Anyway, I'm a total coffee snob. And so when I tell you that Blue Bottle Coffee is seriously good stuff, I am speaking from a coffee snob perspective. When I got my first order, that roasted on date was 2 days before, which is really impressive and extremely important, because the closer to roasting time you can get, the better and fresher your coffee is going to taste. And I thought it tasted exceptional. I don't ever recall actually having a better cup of light roast coffee. And Jay, I understand you recently tried Blue Bottle Coffee too. What did you think?
I did, and it is fantastic. This is something we can absolutely agree on. It's great to see a product. And again, my roasted on date was I think a day. Mine was even closer to the roasted on date than yours. After I received it, or before I received it. But again, fantastic stuff, and encourage all our listeners to try it.
Yeah, and Blue Bottle has something for whatever your coffee palate is. If you like that light, bright, sharp kind of stuff.
I'm more of a dark roast guy.
Yeah, me too. And they've got that too. These deep kind of espresso, kind of hearty sort of things. And another big plus for me has to do with sustainability. Blue Bottle works directly with farmers all over the world to source the most delicious and sustainable coffee they can find. Big deal for me. And Blue Bottle has a great deal for Politics Guys listeners. Go to bluebottlecoffee.com/TPG for $10 off your first coffee subscription order. That's bluebottlecoffee.com/TPG for $10 off. And everyone say it with me now one more time, bluebottlecoffee.com/TPG. Okay. Before we get off of the Charlottesville story, I did want to say one thing. I disagree with you a little bit about the whether or not there's a dog whistle kind of thing. I think there's some of that there, but anyway, we've talked about this before in the past and other things. The other thing I want to talk about, at least a little bit address, is the motives of these protesters. So why do you think these people are getting together and doing this? I mean, it's obviously more than just about Robert E. Lee.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's more than about Robert E. Lee. It's about Robert E. Lee is sort of the hook for them to seize a little bit of a political moment, and that's what troubles me is that I think we can have an honest debate about Confederate statues when they're appropriate, where they're not. Should they be taken down? Should they be left alone as a historical reminder and just sort of counterbalanced? For example, what used to be Robert E. Lee Park, when this occurred in Charlottesville, had been renamed Emancipation Park. I think that's a totally legitimate debate to have, and that's one of the things that I think is so troubling, is when these groups, who are not based on any kind of legitimate debate, but on hate, hijack something like that. And you and I should mention, and as far as their motives, years and years ago, you and I had an experience where we went to counter protest a Klan march in Washington, and it turned into something of a little bit of a riot. But at the end of the day, after all of this, police presence and hundreds, I don't know, thousands. How many people do you think were there?
I don't know. It seemed like a lot at the time.
It seemed like millions. Yes, yeah. Constitution Avenue lined, and people in riot gear and all this sort of thing. I think it was a total of 6 Klansmen showed up. And their entire point, looking back on that, was to simply agitate and to bring about this other violence that occurred in the crowd. And I think sometimes that's, by jumping in and making the big counter protest, you're giving these groups the attention that they want. Now this, again, there's something to be said. This is a little different in that this was a fairly large gathering, as these things go. Again, most Klan marches and so forth, it's usually just like a half dozen goofballs. But this, and I think it's partially because of the internet, people being able to connect like they couldn't before, had an actual fairly, I think they're numbering the right wing folks in the several hundreds. I don't know whether they're in the thousands, but at least in several hundred. And that's a big difference that from what I think we've seen in the past with these kind of things. But yeah, the motivation of these groups is always to incite violence on the other side, to make themselves look like the victims. So I guess just, keep that in mind. I mean, do you agree with me on that?
Well, I think kind of at a deeper level, I think there's a lot of anger, and I think there are a lot of people who are part of these horrible racist movements who feel that they're somehow being cheated out of their part of the American dream. And if you take a look at the trajectory of this country since the 1980s, yeah, okay, the economic pie is growing slowly, but it's not being shared equally. There's massive inequality. And so there's huge groups of people all of a sudden see a life for themselves, especially a lot of younger guys saying, well, life isn't going to be as good for me as it was for my dad and maybe for my grandfather and so forth. And they want to blame someone, but saying, well, it's the inexorable advance of capitalism. That's not nearly as something you could grasp onto as saying, well, it's the blacks, the Mexicans, and the Jews who are taking our country away from us. And I think you have those people who are so angry. And then I think you have the disgusting human beings like David Duke who are using that and channeling that, David Duke. And I think also it's pretty disgusting that the president doesn't come out and just really take a stance against it. And he has people like Sebastian Gorka and Steve Bannon who are kind of, it's semi sort of on the fringes involved in this thing. And it just makes me ill.
Yeah, I'd expect, I would expect the president will come out with something stronger in the next couple of days. I'll be surprised if he doesn't, or if not him. I think Sessions will be stepping up.
Well, I hope you're right. I mean, and Sessions' statement was a little clearer, a little more of a condemnation of the hatred than Trump's was, at least. But still, no one's in the administration, as far as I know, has called it by its name, and I'm going to wait for that. And I think a lot of people are waiting for that. Before we move on to our next story, we want to thank our second advertiser for today. Jay, Casper.
Yes.
You know what I was doing 4 hours ago, Jay?
I bet you were fast asleep.
I was sleeping, and I was sleeping really well too, thanks to, well, a great Casper mattress, actually. Before I got my Casper mattress, I had this sad wilting inner spring thing that I tried to fix it with this mattress topper, and it kind of made me sink in like I was, like sleeping in, I don't know, pudding or something like that, or actually not sleeping in pudding, and that's a disgusting image, and that's how it felt, but now all that's over because I've got a Casper mattress. And Jay, I understand that you have several family members who also have Casper mattresses.
I do. I don't have a Casper mattress yet, but my mother and my sister both do, and they swear by them. And they were very excited when they heard we were a sponsor. So they wanted us for me to add that extra sort of shout out for them that my mom and my sister heartily endorse Casper, and if they say it's okay and you say it's okay, well then that's something I'm going to be getting in the near future.
And it's incredibly easy too. You don't have to go to the mattress store, and there's no these huge markups for commissions and all that. With so many other mattresses, it's just quick, easy, boom. You get to get this mattress in this cool little. It's amazing how they get this big mattress in this little box, and obsessively engineered, and it really is a shockingly fair price. And one of the things I really love, I admit, before I got this, I had some doubts, but I did a lot of research, and they have this combination of foams involved. So you get just that right amount of sink, just that right amount of bounce, and it's really breathable. And if you're a really hot sleeper like me, that's hugely important. And again, you should believe me. You should believe Jay's, family members and so forth, but you don't have to believe us, because Casper has over 20,000 reviews, average of 4.8 stars. And plus, you get free shipping to the U.S. and Canada, 100 nights risk-free. If you don't love it, they will pick it up and refund you everything. So, also, it's designed, developed, and assembled in the United States, which is a nice thing, too, And best of all, Politics Guys listeners get $50 toward any mattress purchase by going to Casper.com/TPG. That's Casper.com/TPG. Terms and conditions apply. Okay, moving on, Jay. So, well, the story that we were originally going to talk about
the story we always figured are we on the brink of nuclear war?
Yeah, exactly.
That became our second story.
That kind of story that we hope future historians won't look back on as the genesis of the great U.S., Korean, Chinese War of 2018, right? As everyone knows, for years, North Korea has been working to become a nuclear power capable of hitting the mainland United States. And their progress toward this goal has been pretty rapid in the last few years. And most analysts actually believe that at some point before the next presidential election, North Korea is going to have the ability to successfully target the continental U.S. with a nuclear missile. And just like previous U.S. presidents, President Trump has vowed that this will not happen. And last week, in response to the latest North Korean missile test, the UN Security Council, which includes Russia and China, unanimously approved a U.S. initiative that imposed major international sanctions against North Korea. And this, in turn, resulted in fierce denunciations from Pyongyang, including a threat to target the U.S. territory of Guam. Now, in the past, these sort of semi-lunatic public pronouncements of the North Korean propaganda machine, they've been largely ignored by U.S. presidents, presumably under the theory, I guess, that if a crazy person is screaming at you, it's kind of counterproductive to scream back. But President Trump...
Go ahead.
President Trump, he's taken a different approach, right? First, by threatening North Korea with fire and fury like the world has never seen, then responding to criticism of those comments by suggesting that maybe he was being too soft, and then most recently saying that the U.S. is locked and loaded. But I should point out, despite the public bluster on both sides, there's no indication of U.S. military preparations for an imminent attack, and there are reports that U.S. and North Korean diplomats are engaged in back-channel talks. So, Jay, what do you make of all this? Is this another Cuban Missile Crisis type moment, as some people are suggesting, or is the media blowing all this out of proportion?
I don't think it's there yet, although I think it's a little funny. I would point out as you said, sort of despite all the bluster and talk, there's back channel negotiations. I might say that perhaps because of that, there are some negotiations. The other thing that Trump said that I just want to put out there because I think it's just fantastic. It was the headline the other day was that there will be big trouble if the North Koreans move forward. I think we are not there at a crisis point yet. I think also one of the reasons that U.S. presidents were able to ignore some of those North Korean threats and saber rattling before is because there wasn't a belief that they could actually pull it off. They could have missiles that would actually work, that they would have nuclear warheads that would actually work. But we're to the point now where we know that they have that. Now, again, it would seem that they may even have the missile capacity to hit the continental U.S., although what it appears they do not have yet is the ability to miniaturize a nuclear device small enough to fit on one of those intercontinental missiles. But I think most military analysts would agree that they do have the technology and the ability to hit a place like Guam. So I think we're sort of a point where we have to take a little more seriously, and we can't just shrug it off and laugh. Oh, that crazy Kim family. So I'm not. I'm not going to condemn Trump as so many others have, because I think maybe we're to the point of he needs to send that message, both to the North Koreans and to the Chinese. Look, hey, maybe this guy's a little bit crazy. Maybe there might actually be something that happens here, so.
I've heard that argument that Trump is doing a strategically savvy thing and he's actually speaking more to Beijing than Pyongyang and all this kind of thing. And I think, do you know who we're talking about here? Donald Trump? Are we suggesting he's playing some game of three-dimensional chess here, and as opposed to just being Donald Trump?
Let me be clear. I'm not suggesting that Trump necessarily thought ahead and said, "Oh, I will calibrate and calculate this message, and I will try to look crazy in order to create some strategic uncertainty, strategic ambiguity, that will play in Beijing." And no, I think it was just Trump being Trump, and he's saying sort of his stuff. But in this case, it happens to fit what needs to be said. I'm not going to credit him with again all that forethought, but that said, I don't think it's the wrong thing to say necessarily.
Yeah. Well, and I've been thinking about and really thinking deeply about our options that we have here, and it seems to me essentially when we're looking at this situation, we have basically 5 options. First off, I usually try to get in lists of 4, but
you like lists.
I do. I'm a list guy. Yeah, I think it's just my professor's sort of experience sort of thing. I don't know, but yeah, let me just kind of briefly go through them, okay? Because none of them are great. But
Option 1.
Option 1. Hope that sanctions hold and get them to come to the negotiating table and maybe give up their program. Okay. Yeah, not going to happen. Maybe sanctions will hold somewhat, but I don't think, China has too much of an interest in, not preventing the collapse and so forth. And I think
and I think the North Koreans are always happy to negotiate,
yeah,
while they continue to work on
exactly.
More nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Option 2, a massive preventative strike before they can strike at us. Well, let's hope it doesn't happen, because if it does, we're talking millions dead, and that's just going to be, and that could potentially get China involved, and we could be talking something just horrific. Option 3, a limited strike that would maybe get North Korea to back down and show them that, hey, we're willing to use force. I think the problem with this option is that we'd assume that North Korea knows that this is a limited strike and not the start of a major strike. And so that's the kind of thing that can escalate pretty quickly. So again, we're still talking, even if a limited strike, tens of thousands dead. And this is a horrible option. Another option, option 4, a decapitation strike, so-called, right? Where we try to remove Kim Jong-un from power. And good luck with that. They've spent that whole regime is based on keeping that family safe, and they got bunkers and things and so forth. And the idea we'd be able to do any kind of surgical decapitation strike, that's the kind of thing for movies. I don't think that's really what could happen. I think the only way that kind of thing could happen would be if the Chinese decided that was a smart move and they have a little more entree into that world and so forth. But I don't see that happening either. And option 5, accepting that North Korea is eventually going to become a nuclear power capable of hitting the mainland United States and coming to terms with that. And I think that's a crummy option, but I think that's probably how things are going to go. Presidents have said, this is this kind of whatever, not line in the sand here, but this red line, But
Right. This will not stand.
it will stand. And there's nothing we can do about it that's not going to cause, like I said, tens of thousands or even millions of deaths. And so we're going to just have to accept this. And I certainly don't like it. Nobody likes it. But if there's another more viable option, I certainly haven't heard or seen anything of it.
Well, another option, and I'm not saying it's an option that we have because it's not really our card to play, is in Trump ratcheting up some of the rhetoric, and maybe reaching not just the Chinese but the folks who are around Kim Jong-un, and Kim is incredibly paranoid. All of his family have been, and they routinely execute a bunch of their closest advisors and uncles and generals and brothers even. But I think he does that for a reason. I mean, just because he's paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get him. I think there could be a possibility. Look, if we work with the Chinese to get some sort of internal regime change to happen. I mean, it would essentially, a coup supported by the Chinese. Now, again, there's a lot of that goes into that, and it's not really our card to play. There's only so much we can do. But when I think some of his aides start thinking about the possibility that you could have an entire country vaporized, and things would not go well for them, they might start considering, well, what's the best deal we can cut? I'll differ with you on the can we accept a nuclear armed North Korea that can hit the U.S.? I think we just absolutely can't. And even if that means military action, because in that case, it's a matter of taking the military action sooner rather than later. And if it's also setting the precedent of what happens, whatever happens in North Korea, the Iranians are watching.
Yeah.
So,
well, I just think that given the fact that so much of this is old technology, that the know-how is out there, if a state wants to devote enough of its resources to doing this, it's going to be able to do this, and we unfortunately can't control it. And so I certainly hope you're right, and not that we're going to do some kind of preventative strike. I think the ideal outcome would be is if there would be some kind of internal thing or maybe Chinese assisted thing that would remove Kim Jong-un from power. That would be great. But he is not just this crazy fat kid that people make him out to be. Seriously, he is a crafty, capable operator. I mean, think he was the youngest of Kim Jong-il's 3 kids. And he was, at the time, he was 27. He managed to consolidate power after his dad's death in 2011. This is a smart guy. This is a guy who
what were
knows,
you doing at 27?
Yeah, exactly. So, and I just think this is a really dangerous game that Donald Trump is playing. And I'd say I hope he knows what he's doing, but I don't think he does. I hope the people around him know what they're doing. And thankfully, I think at least on his foreign policy team, he's got some good, solid people, like, for instance, McMaster, that a lot of the alt-right type folks are trying to push out. That's a whole other kind of story, basically. But let's hope that cooler heads prevail on both sides. All right, before we move on, we'd like to thank our final sponsor for today's show, Dollar Shave Club. Dollar Shave Club is the smarter choice. Get a great shave at a great price that's conveniently delivered right to your door with Dollar Shave Club. I've told you before how impressed I am by the shave I get using Dollar Shave Club, their blades and their Dr. Carver shave butter. But I should mention, I'm not the only one in my house who loves it. Recently, my wife told me that when she was cleaning out her bathroom, she found a stray package of non-Dollar Shave Club cartridges, and she said her immediate reaction, her immediate reaction was disappointment. She said because she likes the Dollar Shave Club cartridges so much more than these other overpriced ones. And I know, Jay, you also had a very positive reaction to Dollar Shave Club, right?
I do. Best shave ever had, and you cannot beat the convenience and nor the price. And that's something that again, I'm a pretty busy man, as you might expect, Mike, a big shot like me. But running to the drugstore or to the big box store to pick up razor blades that are overpriced, it's like a punch in the gut to me. Just one more thing I have to do, and money that I shouldn't have to spend. But Dollar Shave Club, has really solved that problem for me. And I get sort of the best quality blades for a great price and delivered right to my home.
Yeah, I mean, and even better, for a limited time, new members get their first month of the executive razors. Is really nice, kind of weighty. I guess they call it a handle, right? With a tube maybe of their Dr. Carver shave butter for only $5 with free shipping. And after that, razors are just a few bucks a month. It's a $15 value for only $5. And again, in that first month's box, you get this great weighty handle, a cassette with 4 cartridges, and a tube of the shave butter. And after your first month, replacement cartridges will ship automatically at the regular price. No hidden fees, no commitments. Cancel whenever you want, but you're not going to want to, really, honest. And you can only get this offer exclusively at dollarshaveclub.com/TPG. That's dollarshaveclub.com/TPG. Okay, moving on. I want to turn back to domestic politics a little bit here. This week, after Trump administration officials said that the president would not declare the opioid crisis a national emergency, well, he did just that. We should expect this by now. Now, the declaration was in response to a report from the President's Opioid Commission, which early in the week recommended that a national emergency, in fact, be declared. And declaring a national emergency means a number of things. For instance, it makes FEMA money available to states. It allows public health officials to be redeployed to deal with the crisis. It eases the availability of opioid treatment drugs, and it allows Medicaid to pay for more treatment. And it would also presumably put more pressure on Congress to appropriate money to deal with a public health crisis it's killed more than 33,000 people. This is back in 2015. The numbers are even higher today, and results in overall costs in terms of, we're talking treatment, lost worker productivity, and criminal justice system costs, over $80 billion a year. So Jay, would you agree that this is a national emergency and President Trump did the right thing in declaring one?
Yeah, I think so. To me, I guess maybe this is acting maybe a little bit more with, like, the pen and the phone than going through Congress. And I think we could quibble about the process of, and I think you're right. What really needs to happen is, a more national policy, congressional stepping in. Although, again, not to diminish efforts that the states have made, or the efforts that Congress has made already. But I think it's important, and it's a step in the right direction. I thought you and I was pretty sure that you and I would agree on this part. And I wanted to also bring in something that I'm willing to bet we might not quite see as eye to eye on. And because it's one comparison that's been made lately is between opioid manufacturers and big tobacco. And the argument essentially is that in both cases, companies engaged in, false advertising on a massive scale by misleading the public about the safety of their product. And now we're seeing a number of states that are attempting lawsuits against both manufacturers of opioids and distributors of the drugs. For the distributors, they're also arguing that they ignored clear evidence of health hazards because it was really profitable to do so. And right now there are 5 states bringing lawsuits: Ohio, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Missouri, and New Hampshire. And Kentucky actually settled with Purdue Pharma a few years ago on false advertising charges. They got $24 million for 8 years, which is really a drop in the bucket, both in terms, of the cost of the crisis in Kentucky and in terms of the tens of billions of dollars that Purdue has earned from their drug OxyContin, which they knew wasn't a viable treatment for chronic pain and was killing thousands of people and ruining, even more lives than that. So, Jay, I wanted to get your thoughts on these lawsuits. Yeah, we've talked about this before when the Ohio suit came out. I'm not crazy about states going out there looking for a deep pocket. I'd have to, look at the individual evidence of do we actually have false advertising and so forth, or were these drugs that had a legitimate purpose, and they do, being abused by doctors who were, essentially there were pill mills where they would prescribe whatever to whomever for however long you needed. That there was essentially criminal action that superseded, the sale of these drugs, and they were being used improperly. So I'm not crazy about that. The other thing, and I was thinking about throwing this out last week. There's a report that was done and it was put together by Express Scripts, of all folks, the pharmacy company. Again, they don't manufacture pharmaceuticals, but they put out a lot of them. And it's interesting in just discussing opioids and Medicaid, and there is a link, and it's a little troubling. That with Medicaid expansion, you also had opioid expansion, and that now opioids take up a large chunk. And I want to say, I don't have the report in front of me. It's something like 25% of, no, not 25% of the budget, 25%, I think, of Medicaid recipients have had an opioid prescription, which seems is higher than the average guy on the street with private insurance. And also, now again, that's not to say that some of those prescriptions are completely legitimate. Hey, I'm having my wisdom teeth out. Here's a prescription for 2 Oxycontins or something like that. But I think that's another piece to look at, is that in our rush to make medical treatment available and without the right government oversight, this can actually happen. But I digress. Your question was about the lawsuits, and my thought is, again, I'm always, as a lawyer, I'm always hesitant to comment on suits until I've seen the evidence, and I haven't really seen the evidence yet, and we'll see. But my sense is this is just government looking for a deep pocket, taxation kind of by other means, and I'm typically not a fan of that.
Well, I'd say if it's government looking for a deep pocket, and the pocket's made so deep by falsely advertising and resulting in the deaths of thousands of people, I'm all for it.
If that's the case.
Yeah, I think there's some pretty strong.
I don't know that I have the facts on that yet. But.
Well, when you have evidence like in some states like West Virginia, Ohio, of course, is one of the hardest hit states, West Virginia as well, where you have evidence of massive amounts of prescriptions being prescribed well in excess of what any reasonable person would think would be warranted. I mean, that's when the distributors are supposed to.
But does that go to the manufacturer or to the doctor prescribing?
Well, it might go. Well, it goes to the distributors, and distributors are the groups are also that are being brought into these lawsuits, like Express Scripts, like CVS, like Walgreens, those sort of major distributors. There are many states that are arguing that they have a role in this, and well, in some cases, they actually do have a legal responsibility to note these huge issues when it looks like that these drugs are being abused. Yeah. And so, I think it's pretty clear to me.
And look, and if that's the case, and like I said, if that evidence comes out there and we haven't seen both sides, then those parties ought to be held responsible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think that this is something to me that, based on the evidence that we have, this reminds me a lot of the big tobacco thing. I think one problem sort of that the states are going to encounter that they didn't with big tobacco is that the use of these products, there are a lot more parties involved. With the tobacco companies, it's directly from the tobacco companies to the consumers. But here you have the FDA intervening, you have the doctors intervening, and so forth, and that kind of distributes a lot of the blame, and so that can be a lot harder to make an individual case then, and so forth. But certainly, what everyone can agree on is this is a national tragedy, and we need to do something about it. Okay. Moving on, speaking of another tragedy or potential tragedy, this week a draft of a climate report by scientists from 13 federal agencies was leaked to the media, basically in fear that the Trump administration might reject or bury the report and not allow it to become part of the National Climate Assessment, which by law presidents are required to conduct every 4 years. Now, the report concludes that there is a clear connection between human activity and climate change, a connection that, a number of people in the Trump administration, including the president himself at times, have questioned. More specifically, the report concludes that it is extremely likely that over half of the global mean temperature increase since 1951 can be linked to human influence. Now, the National Academy of Sciences has signed off on the report, and so the next step is the approval of the report by 13 agencies, including the EPA, which is headed by climate change skeptic Scott Pruitt, who, previous to becoming the agency's administrator, of course, sued the EPA multiple times as Attorney General of Oklahoma. So, Jay, how do you feel about the leak, and what do you think about the report's findings?
Oh, I guess. I mean, you can't really see me, the big yawn here that I'm giving over the air, but This is sort of the same as always. Okay, if they've got the report, let's put it through the right channels and have it vetted, and see what they say, and they'll put out conclusions, and other folks can take that data and I guess test it against
But I mean,
or run the same tests and see if they get the same answers.
I mean, about the leak itself.
Look, I'm always in favor of science if it's conducted properly. The whole idea of the leak. Look, this is I don't want to say the deep state, because that's always sounds a little silly and probably more sinister than it needs to. But this is federal officials who are trying to stick it to Trump and score political points by doing the leak. And I think that's
one way to look at it
for what it is. And let's to me, there's nothing.
Well, one way to look at it is federal officials trying to stick it to Trump. Another way to look at it is a legitimate fear that the Trump administration would in fact bury this, and so they wanted to get it out there before that had a chance to happen. And I think that's an equally reasonable way of looking at it. And maybe there's a combination of both, and maybe a lot of these federal officials want to stick it to Trump, especially these scientists and these agencies, because they have good reason to believe, based on multiple public statements, not just by the EPA director, but by the president himself, using the words hoax multiple times, that their research is not going to be taken seriously by the administration.
Well, let's wait and see. Wouldn't it be much more damning, though, if you had prepared all this and then submitted it and it was buried, and then you come out and say, here's what we actually submitted, and it was covered up, and I'm resigning in protest?
I guess resigning in protest might make it a little more, but then your concern is who do you get replaced by? I mean, already there's been an effort by the Trump administration to put as many people as possible in top positions who are, I think they would probably call it, more well attuned to the needs of industry or something like that, which is more shills.
We could do a whole show on some of this, the EPA science vetting, and the Obama's created the Office of what was it called? The Office of Scientific Accountability or something like that. We'll do a follow up on that. I'll pull together my research, but look, it's the president's prerogative to put in those places whom he thinks, and in the past, these positions have been filled by folks who are certainly sponsored and in many cases allied with the left and the environmentalist movement. Fair enough, but let's call it for what it is. And again, there's always the sense that if you're a scientist in industry, that's not real science. And I would, having worked in the private sector, I'd say that typically there are some pretty high standards in the private sector versus the public sector. And I think I know public sector people certainly don't look at it that way. We'll get all kinds of anger about that, but
well, I think one big difference is
the numbers are what they are, and the data is what it is.
That's right.
And let's take a look at it.
I don't know. I guess I have the radical idea that if you're in charge of something called the Environmental Protection Agency, that you should have a bias toward environmental protection. But hey, that's just me.
No. Crazy. You should have a bias towards coming up with the right answer to correct science. Now, whether I
don't think there's a right answer. I mean, I think that there are clearly interests that need to be balanced. I certainly will admit that, that doing the things that we need to do to protect global climate catastrophe, and I use those words very specifically, will require some short-term sacrifice, some serious short-term sacrifice. That's the trade-off. And what I want to see is an honest exchange of ideas between an environmental protection agency that is focused on that, and maybe then, a commerce secretary who's focused on other things. But when you pollute the whole process, when your supposed advocate for the environment is actually more an advocate for oil companies like Scott Pruitt is. And so I think it's one of the most, right up there with Jeff Sessions as Attorney General, Scott Pruitt as EPA administrator. It's just ongoing disaster for the environment, and I think the future of humanity. So anyway.
It'll be fine.
Yeah, you think so, and I hope you're right, but it's easy
again,
to
I'll
say
also
that,
point
whistle
out
past the graveyard.
if Kim Jong Un nukes Guam next week, people will not be as concerned about global warming and will focus on some bigger, more real threats.
Well, I think it's a very real threat and a much bigger threat. But anyway, again, as I said a bunch of times, I hope you're right. I wish I could share your optimism, but I just don't. Okay, moving on. It is time for What We're Reading, where we step back from the crazy pace of the news cycle and talk about some of these other things that might not be in the news, maybe a little more in-depth, thoughtful things that we're reading, listening to, or watching. And I'm going to start off this week, Jay. I am recommending a newish, I guess, politics blog / Facebook page called The Political Abstract. It's written by Dan Summers, who actually happens to be a Politics Guys listener.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Dan's a political direct marketer from northern New Jersey, where he's worked for the last 10 years. And he tells me he's always been a political enthusiast and amateur prognosticator. And so right around the time of the presidential election, he started the Political Abstract Facebook page. And it's dedicated to providing detailed analysis and encouraging thought-provoking political discussion and civil discourse across the political spectrum. And I thought, hey, that's exactly the sort of thing we try to do here on the Politics Guys. So I'd recommend everyone check it out, and you can do so by going to facebook.com/political abstract. And there's also a political abstract page on Medium at medium.com/polyabstract. So Jay, what's your recommendation for this week?
Well, I always go into the weekend thinking, okay, I've got something good and different that is not just from the Wall Street Journal Saturday review page, but then something comes out and it's just so damn good that I have to focus on that. And this week there is it's in the review section, a piece by Dr. Mark Lilla, who is a professor at Columbia, about the liberal crack-up. And really he has a book out. The book isn't out yet. This is an essay adapted from the book. But the idea that identity politics has so kind of polluted the left that they can't reach any consensus with the rest of the country anymore. And it's even again cracking up the coalition that the left has built. And I think he makes some fantastic points. And again, this is a liberal certainly writing this. But a couple things I think in particular are, and it struck me even more so after than the events of yesterday in Charlottesville. But I just want to read a quick section. He says, "As a teacher, I'm increasingly struck by a difference between my conservative and progressive students. Contrary to the stereotype, the conservatives are far more likely to connect their engagements to a set of political ideas and principles. Young people on the left are much more inclined to say that they are engaged in politics as an X, meaning as whatever group they are choosing to represent, concerned about other X's and those issues touching on Xness. And they are less and less comfortable with debate." And he draws from this that when we start getting into this, look, I approach this issue as an X, as a African American, as a woman, as a Hispanic, as a whatever you want to call yourself, as a transgendered person, you lose the ability to reach out to a broader audience. You necessarily exclude them from the conversation, and that's part of the problem. Why we can't talk to each other and we sort of talk past each other. So I recommend this. And again, this is a piece written by someone who is avowedly liberal, and sort of trying to get back to, what it used to be. Sort of kind of his point is a little bit, well, it used to be about the class warfare. I think we just, sort of do more than that, do more with that, which again, I'm against class warfare, but there is, again, the idea of reaching out to the common Americanness in all of this, rather than trying to isolate everyone into their own race, gender, ethnicity bubble.
Right, and something, of course, we talked about earlier in the show on the side of the right, with the people who approach issues as I am an aggrieved white man
right.
whose
Exactly.
country is being taken away from him.
And the whole thing again. If that the idea is if you're coming and saying, look, this angers me as a white person or as a black, that's the problem. We should be looking at this as this is something that upsets me as an American.
Sure. Yeah. Identity politics taken to an incredible extreme. And you mentioned social media earlier, certainly a big part of it. And it is absolutely a hugely distressing problem. So sounds like a great article. I'm actually looking forward to reading it myself. All right. Well, that does it for this episode. Thanks everyone for listening. We hope you like what you heard and that you check out today's sponsors, Blue Bottle Coffee. For $10 off your first coffee subscription, go to bluebottlecoffee.com/TPG. Casper, where Politics Guys listeners get $50 toward any mattress purchase by going to casper.com/TPG. And Dollar Shave Club, where new members get their first month of the Executive Razor with a tube of their Dr. Carver shave butter for only $5 with free shipping by going to dollarshaveclub.com/TPG. You know, listener support is a huge help to us and greatly appreciated. If you're interested in joining our awesome group of Politics Guys supporters, you can go to politicsguys.com and click on the Patreon link. And if you want to support the show without spending a single thing, you can share this episode with your friends and followers or pass it along our new show posts and tweets on Facebook and Twitter. And hey, leaving reviews and ratings on iTunes also helps. If you've got a question, comment, correction, or just a random thought you want to share, you can email us at mail@politicsguys.com, and our Facebook page where you can message us and where we post stuff throughout the week is facebook.com/politicsguys page. We're also on Twitter @politicsguys. Executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Trey Orndorff, and Bruce Johnson. The show is produced by Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Wednesday. We hope you'll join us.